So 3 weeks ago, we started a new series, Simply Important, and we've been talking about the five covenants of church membership, but really on a deeper level than that, there are really five commitments to being a follower of Jesus. I mean, whether you join a church or not, these are important things for us who are Christ followers. And so prayers, we looked at that. Presence was last week, and today is gifts, and then service and witness. So there's two more after this. And next Sunday is Commitment Sunday, and this week you'll get a letter in the mail. And with the letter is a commitment card, a pledge card, and we ask that you discuss what your giving is going to be as a family for 2018, and that you pray about it together, and that next Sunday that you come prepared to make that pledge for this next year. We know that we're in a campaign inspired, and so one of the things that we've suggested is if you want to just continue, I mean, if you're tithing and you're giving and you've given to the Inspired, just continue to do what you're doing. And if you're not quite there yet, then you may need to have a discussion and talk about that. And so I'm going to talk about this a little bit today, about giving. At the core of the Christian faith is this concept of giving. The verse that most of us memorized when we went to Vacation Bible School or when we were kids was John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he did what? He gave. He gave his only begotten Son. So at the core of the gospel, of our faith, God gave. Jesus said of himself, the Son of Man came not to give, the Son of Man came to give his life as a ransom for many. So Jesus came to give. So let me give a disclaimer. We're talking about giving, and this is important for all of us who are followers of Jesus. And we're also talking about making a pledge for next year. So if you're visiting today, we just want you to take the teaching that's basic to the Christian faith and take that, but don't feel any obligation to come next Sunday with a pledge card. All right? Or if you're just checking this Christian thing out and you're not sure you want to be a follower yet. But one of the things I would say that's fundamental to the faith is that giving is core. God gave. And I don't think that we can be Christ-like unless, which is, by the way, the goal of being a follower of Jesus, if we don't have and learn how to have a giving heart. And the truth is that most inspiring people, most of them, the most inspiring people that I've known in my life were givers. And as a matter of fact, the most inspiring people I've ever known were willing to give themselves in ways to others and ways that others wouldn't, so that they could make an impact that others couldn't make. And I think it's important to talk about giving and talk about money, and we don't do it much. This may be the one time you come to church this year and you say, well, all they do, I was here at the same time last year and all they do is talk about money. Well, you need to come more often. I think when we live in areas of our lives that are consistent with the way, when we line up the areas of our lives with the way God wants us to live, that are consistent with the way God wants us to live, I think our lives go better. I think they get better, not worse. We become enriched more by that instead of impoverished. And I think that's true for relationships and marriages and for our work lives and for our finances. And one of the things that helps me a lot of times when I'm considering something is to know, well, what is the purpose of this? I remember when I was in school, just looking at, well, what is the philosophy of ministry? What does it mean to be in ministry? What's the overall purpose of what we do? And so one of the things I want to look at is this larger picture of giving today, and just talk about what is the purpose of money. What is the purpose of God's blessing us financially? I don't believe we can be successful at things, and in my opinion, unless we kind of understand those things and what their purpose was and what they're designed for. If you're trying to build something, and let's say you're constructing, let's say, a flower box, or we were down in Austin some time ago, and my son-in-law was building, they were redoing their backyard land, and he built this flower box. And so what if you tried to build a flower box or something, and you needed to drive some nails, and you were trying to drive those nails with a fork? It's not what the fork was designed for. It'd be pretty tough to do that, wouldn't it? Go like this. Or if you were trying to plow a piece of ground, maybe get a garden ready or a flower bed. I know these are ridiculous examples, but for the sake of your understanding, let's say you're trying to prepare a piece of ground and you were trying to do it with a baseball hat. I mean, it just doesn't work because that's not what it was designed for. Why did God create money? What's the purpose? And I've got some good news as we talk about that. I think there's three things that God created money for, to bless us with. And here's the first one. I think you're going to like this one. Maybe you're going to like this one too much, okay? The first purpose, God created money so that we could spend it to enjoy life. One of the things I love about our faith is that we believe a good God created a good world and put us right in the middle of it to enjoy it. Not every religion or religious concept believes that or teaches that. Some religions teach that the material world is nothing more than an illusion on the one hand, or maybe evil on the other, and that we should ignore it. Most of those are Eastern religions. Or that something's inherently wrong with this world, this material world, and that it runs contrary to our spiritual nature, so we should do everything we can to avoid it. But that's not what our faith teaches. If you go back to the very beginning of the Bible, in the opening book, in the opening chapter, one of the things that it says in the book of Genesis is that a good God purposely created a material universe, and after every act of creation, including the creation of the world and the creation of our physical bodies and us, with all of our physical appetites and desires, after every act of creation, God looked at it, and what did he say? This is good. God created us to be a part of this magnificent world and to be in it, and he wants us to enjoy it. He gave us 5 incredible senses that we use to enjoy the wonders of this world, to feel the wind on our face, to smell the fragrance of a rose, to hear the singing of birds, to see a loved one's face, to taste the joy of homemade, I'm thinking of Thanksgiving, of homemade pecan pie. And maybe if you're from the South, a little bit of cornbread dressing. That may not sound like a big deal to you, but Bev grew up in the North, and all their bread was not made with cornbread. And it's like that. Anyway. Is God a good God or what? What I want you to understand is that pleasure is, now listen, let me tell you a secret. Pleasure is not the devil's invention. You guys hang on a second. God even invented sex. I'm just saying. God invented good things, and he put us in this world so that we might enjoy them. In 1 Timothy 6:17, God says, God who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. God wants you to enjoy life, and one of the reasons God blesses you financially so that you can do that. So you have the means to enjoy the creation that God has created for you. And I really think you're supposed to enjoy it. Now, there are many reasons why maybe people are turning in our country are turning away from the Christian faith. I think one of the reasons is because of the way sometimes Christianity gets represented in news networks and national media, and it seems like they pick sometimes those people that represent Christianity and the church that are the most dour, and they seem like they're not always so smart. You know what I'm saying? And and they just seem to be kind of negative, and it seems like everything that's enjoyable ticks them off. You know what I'm saying? But we're not that way. God created us to enjoy the world, and the world is not an accident. Time plus chance plus matter is just not thrown out there to and create this wondrous place. There was a divine creator behind, a purposeful God that was behind all of this, that created this wonderful world and puts all of these wonders and pleasures that we enjoy in it, including our finances. Now, you ask the question, well, are there limits? And the answer is, of course there are limits. There's one definition that I've appreciated over the years. It's a definition for the word sin. Now don't go too far off here. Let me call you back. And it goes like this. A definition of sin is when you take something that's good, that God created, and you make that thing an ultimate thing. And when you make that thing an ultimate thing, the good thing that God created becomes a not so good thing, a bad thing. Let me give you an example. I was talking about Thanksgiving, and I mentioned pecan pie, and so food is an example. It's a very simple, enjoyable pleasure that God created that we enjoy and that we need. But you eat too much food, you eat too often, you eat the wrong stuff, you live to eat, you make it your God, and what was meant to bring blessing to your life becomes a curse. So I've been going to the doctor, and they started a few years ago checking my hemoglobin A1C. I thought, well, what in the world is that when they first did it? And I'm not sure I still all completely understand it, but they said at the time, it's okay, you're okay. In the fives or something. Well, over the years, that's just kind of ticked up. You know what I'm saying? And so now it's about 6-1, and my doctor just freaks out. And she says, there's some things you got to quit doing. And most of it has to do with sugar, and that's hard. Yesterday we had Charge Conference here, and it went great, by the way. We missed some of you, but this place was full. We had all the churches in the district together, and I thought it went very well. And we had lunch over in the activity center, catered from Chick-fil-A, and in the box, it was chicken, right? Are y'all awake here? Did you go to the football game last night? You must be from OSU. I'm kidding. They won too. But in the box was a cookie. I ate it. And I had some ice cream and last night, and I ate it. And I know I'm going to pay, when you take a good thing and you make it an ultimate thing, which I try not to do, but it becomes a bad thing like food or maybe other pleasures. God's created boundaries and ways for us to live within those boundaries. And I think the same is true not only with food and sex and a lot of other pleasures, but also with wealth. You live for it, you serve it, you seek after it. That which is good and God created to bless your life becomes a curse. And the main point here is that God created a wonderful world, a good world, and He wants you to enjoy it. but within the boundaries that God's created, which leads me to the second point, is I believe we have to be balanced. And so God not only gives us finances so we can spend it, he also gives us finances so we can save it. And I know this is something that we try to tell our kids. And one of the things that we learn early sometimes is that, we try to save and do things right, but life is not always fair, is it? Sometimes bad things happen to us. Bad things are going to happen. I hate to tell you this after I told you how good life is. Bad things are going to happen to all of us. Sometimes it's emotional, sometimes it's material, financial, sometimes it's vocational, sometimes it's financial. And one of the reasons God wants to bless us now is so that we're prepared for then. And I'm talking about saving, investing, and getting ready for what's coming. And I'm not trying to be a financial advisor here. I'm just telling you what biblical principles are. And I'm not sure this is very biblical, but there's a HBO series that we started watching when it started, and I'm not suggesting that you watch it. It's called Game of Thrones. It's pretty graphic, but there's some people that live up, some characters in the series that live up in the north at a place called Winterfell. And one of the things that they're always saying is winter is coming, we need to be ready. Now, I don't think God created that series, but that's not bad advice. In Proverbs 6, it talks about the ant. And God says even the ant, who has one of the smallest brains of any creature that lives on earth, knows that if they don't prepare, that something bad will happen to them, and because winter is coming. And it comes to all of us. And God blesses us now so that we'll be ready then. And it's funny when we go through one of those difficult times and things are kind of rough, we tend to say something like this: God, why aren't you blessing me? Why aren't you meeting my needs? And we go to things like Trey was talking about, like prosperity theology, or we kind of get off and, God, where are you? And God says, in essence, I have blessed you. You remember those good times? Maybe you should have prepared. Consider the ant. Be prepared for the difficult times. I have a blessing for you of plenty. And I have a blessing with you in mind. One of the purposes of money is for us to save. And you may say, but look, this may relate to another service. I don't know. But you may say, well, we just can't seem to get our act together. We have more bills than we have money at the end of the month, and we can't seem to live within our means. And what my response would be is, if you can't live within your means, God means for you to change how you live. So I want to just show you an example. This is called the U.S. debt clock. See if we can look at that. Up in the left-hand corner, this is a live, you can go to usdebtclock.org. Up in the top left corner is the amount of debt that the United States has, over $20 trillion. And you can see the revenue in the green over there, $3 trillion that's coming in. And the amount of debt that comes in is about $400,000 per minute of debt to our national debt. And it just adds up. And when we look at something like this, we think, well, this is nuts. I mean, the Congress seems to be spending more money and incurring more debt and can't pay and has no plans for the future and can't get along. We heard a speaker yesterday at church conference that says we have no laws anymore. And this was interesting. One of the main speakers, he said, what we have are presidents who make executive order because Congress can't agree or get along. We're so split. and then the courts fight it out and settle what the executive order is about. I mean, it's nuts. We wouldn't run our households that way, or we shouldn't, and maybe some of us do. Maybe in your scenario, the zeros are different, but maybe it's the same mentality. God, and here's the biblical principle, God blesses us now so that we can save and prepare for the winter that's coming. And some of you say, well, we're young, we're just starting out, we need things, and so we're going to get what we need now, and we're going to borrow the money, put it on a credit card, and we'll pay it off in the years to come. And what I would say that's not smart. That's not the way that our nation, our country, has amassed a financial health, is by negative savings, which is debt. By spending what we don't have. The way that we live in a biblical way, I think, is when we choose to delay our desires, delay gratification. And then when we have something we want, and we save for it, and then when we get it, that's sweet, isn't it? Go like this. That's nice. That's sweet. I'm a baby boomer, and my parents, grandparents, particularly my grandparents, went through the Great Depression, and it's kind of this debt thing is, baby boomers have really kind of contributed to that, because those that have gone before us kind of gave us this message, verbally or non-verbally, that we're very special. And our parents wanted us to be happy, right? And so, and I think there are some of you that are really special here. Let me see who I can point out that's really, I know you're here. You're really special. And you deserve everything your little heart desires, right? I mean, you deserve it, right? And if you don't have the money, you just ought to, well, maybe not. You ought to go ahead and get it. My advice is don't tell your kids that their primary goal and your hope for them is that they'll be happy. Don't tell them that. Don't tell your kids that that's their number one goal. Because what they'll grow up to do is to believe you, and then guess what? You'll be raising a bunch of spoiled brats. And so you're saying, well, what should we tell our kids? Well, let me give you some suggestions, okay? Instead of telling your kids that, tell them this. I love you, and I want you to be wise. I want you to grow up to be wise and a responsible person. I want you to be a person of character, and I want you to have enough internal strength that when that moment comes, and it will, that you will always choose to do the right thing. And you'll understand that it's sometimes hard and there's consequences, but you'll know it's right and you'll choose to do that right thing. I want you to know how to walk with Jesus. Because walking with Jesus is so important. It'll give you a purpose for life, greater than yourself, worth sacrificing for, so that you can contribute and have joy that's eternal. How's that for a message to your kids? Tell them that. And then we should live that way. We should choose to live like we're teaching and telling our kids to live. To enjoy the simple pleasures of life. To spend time in the wonder of creation. To enjoy what God has given us. And so you see, I started talking about your kids so that I could talk to you. So here's the third and final point. We're blessed financially so that we can spend. We're blessed financially so that we can save. And we're blessed by God financially so that we can share. So that we can give to causes that really matter. Trate mentioned that in a lot of ways, giving is down. The nonprofit, the charitable dollar, that's the dollar you give to the church, has gone down because there's so many competing stories out there for that dollar. Hospitals and universities and all good causes. But there's only one place that transforms life. And if you're having trouble with your finances, you ought to consider Financial Peace University. And we teach that around here. It's a great ministry. But God has blessed us with money so that we can share. In 1 Timothy it says, command those who are rich in this present age to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasures for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age so that they may take hold of life. Now listen, that is true life. Isn't that a great phrase? Listen. They may take hold of life that is a true life. In other words, there's a whole lot of false lives out there. How do you take hold of life? I think you learn how to give. I think you become generous at heart. I think you learn to share, and you live by giving good deeds. I can promise you that money will never bring you the joy that God created to bring you unless you learn to give generously through the things that matter most to you, and that now listen, the next part of that matter most to you and matter most to the heart of God. That speaker that was talking yesterday to us that I mentioned earlier about Congress says that probably the sentiment in the nation is going against Christianity, and probably the Congress one of these days, maybe soon, will revoke the charitable contribution through the church. In other words, the dollar you give to the church may be taxable. And so my question to you is about your heart and what matters to God. Will that make a difference to you in the way you give? If you didn't get a deduction on your tax return, would that change the way you give? And maybe that's a reflection of where our heart is. We learn to be generous. David Bach, who was an investment broker, I believe over a fund that had about $1.5 billion, wrote a book. He wrote several books, but one of them is this: Smart Couples Finish Rich. I don't know anything about this guy's faith. He's probably not a Christian, but I think he's discovered a biblical principle. Let me just share a quote and then we'll close. Before I start trying to figure out how much money my clients may need for their future, I first help them try to get a clear idea as to what they see as their purpose in life. What I believe is most important is by first having a conversation about what it is that matters most to you. In other words, what are your values? Values are the key to living smart and finishing rich. The sooner you start putting your values first and stuff second, the sooner you'll get started living a life that excites and empowers you both. Stuff may be nice, but it rarely pulls living it rarely pulls us anywhere worthwhile. Only values do that. So before you can thrive financially, you must figure out what your purpose is, what you care about, what you value. So when we do these stewardship talks and we come to this season, the real question for us when we think about our commitments is this: what do you think your purpose is for? You think it's to be happy? What do you think your purpose here is? What do you think matters the most? What are your values? If you're a committed follower of Jesus, do you believe this gospel changes your life. And that if you were to die today, do you really have faith and believe that you'd go to heaven? And if you believe that you'd go to heaven, then could you believe that if you gave a tithe, that you'd have more money left over because you're living out of purpose and value? There's two biblical principles. The biblical principle of first fruits, we don't give what's left over, we give first. And the second is tithing, giving a 10% of our income. And by giving a 10%, we're not talking about giving 2% to the church and 3% to the university and another 2% to the hospital and another 1% to... We're talking about giving 10% to God. And I'm not creating this. This is biblical stuff. And then above that, we give to Inspired and we give to other things as a gift or an offering. This is in the Old Testament and the New Testament. Jesus was asked about it in the New Testament, and in Matthew 23, he said, yeah, of course you should tithe. There's communion at each corner of the room and places to pray, and I would suggest that you respond today, maybe in prayers, God, what do you want from me? God, what's my purpose? And pray. And pray for those in need. Remember Sharon Lutz. Let's stand and respond as God calls us today.